Well, hi, everybody. It's May the 22nd, 2025, and I'm David Leis, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. So, a warm welcome to everybody as you're joining our audience today. It is May the 22nd, and so good afternoon, Prairie, and so many others that join us regularly. We are thrilled by our audiences and the comments and the questions that you make to make this kind of discussion, dare I say, quite interesting. We do live in very interesting times, and today we're going to talk about, of course, the health of Canada, our federation. We had a vision for the founding of this country in 1867, and so when we see a lot of noise, a lot of quote political noise, it behooves us, I think about history and policy and principles. So I think these discussions are very important, and we really appreciate the feedback. We received thousands of comments. I know a number of our programs received 20, 30,000 views alone. And we want to celebrate that because we want to reach across coast to coast to coast to try to elevate the level of discussion, the insight, and that's in keeping with our mission at the Frontier Center of Public Policy, which is focused on education and public policy, advocating good public policy, better levels of thinking, if you will, that well should serve you as Canadians. So that's my opening reflection here. So thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And I'm very excited about the panel we have joining us. We're so fortunate we have very insightful guests. And I do want to lead off with more people join the program here. I want to highlight some interesting headlines that kind of set the basis for our discussion. And I wanted to start off with just a quick note, because there's a lot of Canadians that are very proud of our nation. We want it to succeed. And often it's been said, what does the true north mean when it comes to our national anthem? And by the way, Robert Kerr, good afternoon to you from Mississauga, Ontario. Yeah, be sure to let us know where you're from. But it's interesting as a kind of a point of, I think, important trivia. The question is, True North was borrowed from Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem, in which he refers to Canada as, quote, that true north whereof we lately heard, in reference to its loyalty to none other than Queen Victoria. So how interesting is that? So when you sing True North, it has a lot of meaning, and a lot of it relates to, I believe, the love of the crown, the traditions that really were essential in the founding of this country. So it's a very interesting point. There's a lot going on in the news, and I wanted to mention that you may have noticed that I believe it was just yesterday that a number of countries unanimously voted in favor of the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty, including Canada. There are 124 nations, including our country. And that is a binding 30-page document. I encourage you to look at it. It's very interesting. It raises certainly lots of questions and debate about sovereignty. Does it make sense for our nation, Canada, when we talk about true north, strong and free, to develop more power to an international body like the World Trade Organization? I do want to note that there were many nations that did not sign the document, and off the top of my head, that include countries such as, well, the United States, India, Russia, China, and among many others. So I think that's a very interesting, maybe that's a topic for another discussion. We also noticed this was reported by the Blacklock's Reporter, which is a great source of facts and information, that according to the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, 51% of Canadians struggle with paying their mortgages. And so this continues to go up as people try to manage their debts. I think that's something that a lot of Canadians can relate to. And it's interesting, a comment from Marlene Moran, who says, one more reason for Alberta sovereignty. I think that references that last news item regarding the pandemic treaty. We also noticed in the US last night, the big bill, it's referred to commonly as the one big beautiful tax bill. It's a large document of some 1,118 pages, was passed by one vote from the House of Representatives, and now that goes to the Senate. And speaking of the Senate, and I think this is relevant to our conversation when it comes to Canada, the Senate in the United States unanimously approved a bill that says no tax on tips. What do you think about that? Isn't that an interesting policy to enable working class people to move forward? Can you imagine if you're working hard as a waiter or waitress? There's all kinds of tips out there, but if you aren't taxed on that, isn't that something? So we also know that Canada Post is back in our sites again. Apparently, the union is mulling a offer of a 13.6 hike in wages over 4 years. So we shall see whether they come to a resolution, whether there's going to be a strike. Remember, they were on one. I believe it was back in, what was it, November, December, and then an arbitrator was entered the process and said they had to come back to it and resolve this by May 22nd. So we shall see. So there's a lot happening in our country, but it obviously, one of the things I did want to highlight is an interesting little story you may have noticed, and that was the top finance officials, the finance ministers from the so-called G7 countries are gathering in Banff. That's a 3-day summit. We've got a picture there of them, so that'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. I think they've got a lot of substantive agenda. And so on that note, I wanted to turn to introducing our dynamic panel. And I want to start with Cory Morgan, who is a well-known columnist and author. He's with the Western Standard. So a warm welcome to you, Cory.
Oh, thanks, David. Always great to talk to you.
And I have Lee Harding is joining us. He's a investigative journalist and a policy analyst with the Frontier Center for Public Policy. And warm welcome to you, Lee.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be on.
And of course, the dynamic Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, who's the Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier. And it's great to see you here again.
Good afternoon, David. Thank you.
So, gentlemen, we have a lot of agenda, and I know our audience is quite keen on these topics about the health and welfare of our federation. And so I wanted to start off with, an initial clip here, and that has to do with our Prime Minister announcing the whole issue of, should be about a short parliamentary session, and there won't be a budget till the fall.
With your economic experience as a former governor of two central banks, why not present Canadians with a budget at the very first opportunity?
Well, this is in fact based on my economic experience. There is not much value in my judgment, and it's considered judgment, and it's judgment based on experience, that there is not much value in trying to rush through a budget in a very narrow window, 3 weeks, with a new cabinet, effectively a new finance minister, just reappointed, but a new finance minister, rush that through, for example, in advance of the NATO summit, which happens after Parliament rises. So the NATO summit, 23rd, 24th, that is going to be a very important event for the security of Canada, but also it will have fiscal implications. It will have budgetary implications for Canada.
So there you have it, the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, giving his rationale about why it doesn't make sense to table a budget. What do you think about that? Aren't budgets important for accountability and transparency? Do you want to go first, Marco?
Sure. Notice how quickly the story deflects to the future. There's this stuff coming up, so we don't need a budget. The truth is, it's kind of disappointing in so many different levels. But the first of which is, let's remember that the key feature of the campaign on how Prime Minister Carney was sort of portrayed to Canadians and in the media was that he was going to be a kind of economic savior in the country. He was touted as this sort of world-class economic mind, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's kind of disappointing now, and it should be disappointing to the people who actually voted for him on that particular issue, that nearly as soon as they get to form the government, they declare that there is really no need to have a budget. It's counterproductive, all this stuff. There are situations in which that might be true in emergency situations and what have you,
Mhm.
but we don't have an emergency situation here. We have a government that has been in place uh, now with a different prime minister for a decade now. This man has been a principal advisor, economic advisor, to the previous prime minister. So there is an enormous continuity there. Um, my sense of it is, and I've heard this said in other places, so it's not really just me, that they might be somewhat scared to present to the public what the numbers actually look like.
Mm.
And opening Parliament and opening a speech from the throne with His Majesty present, and essentially portray this the economic weaknesses of the country in the middle of what they portray to be this giant economic crisis and the trade crisis with the United States. So I don't buy it for a moment that we don't need a budget. We haven't had a budget for over a year from this government. Is actually quite outrageous that we don't have one.
Okay, so that's Marco's comment. We need a budget. Lee, what are your thoughts?
Well, the last time we didn't have a budget was in 2020, and we had a COVID pandemic then. There's nothing nearly so acute right now, and that turned out not to be a great idea anyway, even 5 years ago, because we saw a Liberal government that radically overspent. These Liberals have overspent every year, but when they don't have a budget, it's even worse. And when we look at the Liberal campaign, what their promise was a budget that would probably be a $35 billion deficit, but that was relying on $20 billion of tariff revenue, contrary tariffs on the United States, which we've just found out they actually lifted before the election even happened. So there's some very big credibility problems here with said earlier before the election, some of the things that we've seen since the election, instead of elbows up against Trump, it was thumbs up standing beside him and all sorts of things. If you'd have said, oh, this Liberal government won't even have a budget, I mean, they would have called that conservative fear-mongering.
So Lee, just to clarify something that you said, and there's the Prime Minister with President Trump there, that Canada really didn't institute tariffs. I thought we were retaliating as a nation, but you're understanding that that's actually not technically correct.
Well, we did, but then we lifted them. And it has only come to light in recent days that we had lifted a lot of these countervailing tariffs. So it's not an accurate picture that we've been given. And I think it might be lucky for Carney he's not having a budget, because the duplicity is so apparent that if it were to go back to a confidence vote, he may not have confidence.
Okay. Cory, what is your insight here?
Well, I'm kind of, with Marco and Lee, they're kicking the can down the road. I got a feeling they're hiding a very ugly picture. I believe initially they were saying we weren't even going to get a fall budget. They're saying we're just going to get us a fall economic update. But they realized when that started to blow up that, okay, we better offer a budget. But there's a lot of variables. There was a massive spending promises through the federal election. As Lee pointed out, the tariff revenue that they were counting on isn't going to come in. They also got rid of the carbon tax, which is great. I'm not complaining about that, but it's another revenue stream now that they're lacking. So I suspect that there's a very the economy is not looking great. I mean, the automotive sector is in disarray because of the tariff wars and just because of other subsidies dumped into electrical vehicle markets that never developed. I think they're just ragging the puck and hoping they can figure things out in a few months.
There you go, ragging the puck, hiding the nut, or there's a myriad of metaphors we could use here, but it's not a pretty picture, because in our tradition, Marco, we have a lot of parliamentary traditions that we take seriously in Canada, or I thought we did, where we table, budgets, we meet as a parliament. I know that this upcoming session is going to be awfully short. I think we'll see the King arrive for his 24-hour visit, and we'll be able to see him come and go. And there will be a speech from the throne. I believe that's next Tuesday. But it's not going to be a long reconvening of the Parliament. So is that? I mean, you look at this as a political scientist. Is this kind of an odd change of tradition here in this country where we haven't had Parliament? You know, I'm just trying to remember. Is it 7 months now that we have not met as a Parliament? Don't quote me on that, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been 6 or 7 months. It's interesting to me that the invitation to King Charles to come and open Parliament was done in the middle of all this nearly concocted crisis about sovereignty and the existential nature of our conflict over tariffs with the United States and so forth. So it was touted and designed nearly as a way to sort of show the Americans and sort of puff our chests towards the Americans to say, we are a monarchy and we are different from the American Republic, and is seen as a kind of a pushback against all this nonsense regarding the 51st state and what have you. So in a way, it's kind of a defense of Canadian identity, symbolically speaking. What is sort of ironic is that the lack of respect for parliamentary traditions regarding, for example, the presentation of a budget and the issues of accountability. We should not forget that the Prime Minister isn't elected directly in this country. Right, his office and the authority of his office depends on the confidence of the House of Commons, which Cory just alluded to, and therefore there must be a Parliament open, which we haven't had in a while. There must be a budget presented to the House of Commons, because no appropriations should be taken place. Appropriations and the opposite. So even giving people tax breaks must be done according to procedure, and the process is that it should go through the House of Commons. That is part of the tradition. That is part of our parliamentary rules. And because it is part of our parliamentary rules, in connection to the Crown, it is part of the Canadian identity. So on the one hand, they're trying to tout these sort of differences of Canadians versus the Republic of the United States. And at the same time, they're really thumbing their noses at the traditions that really matter when it comes to democratic accountability.
Okay, so these traditions matter because they are really based on timeless principles that we need accountability and transparency. Otherwise, the people's house, the last time I checked, the House of Commons has this, 1,000-year tradition of being the people's house where people can know what is going on. And, I guess the question is, are we really doing that? It seems like are we appearing to take more motions here rather than real substance here? What do you think, Lee or Cory?
Oh, definitely. There's more style than substance here. I mean, we just heard Mark Carney say that it is because of his vast economic experience that he is not delivering a budget. I'm doing on my judgment. My judgment is based on experience. And so in my experience, there will not be a budget that just wouldn't be a good idea, too many moving parts or whatever the excuse is. I don't want to be partisan here, but I have to think that if Carney had lost the election and the Conservatives had won, Poilievre would probably have been ready to make people sit to the end of July just to undo the last 10 years legislatively as quickly as possible and put the fire on this house out. And right now, we're just ending it June 20th. We're having some fake documents signed. I'm going to end this carbon tax. I'm going to end this income tax. And it's just not even legit. And if Canadians keep believing it, why wouldn't the Liberals keep doing it? But it's not the way to govern, and it's not real. It's not legitimate.
Now, when you say fake documents, what do you mean by that? In the sense that they haven't been approved by Parliament and debated?
Exactly. So when Mark Carney sits in front of a camera and does a Trump-style executive order and says, I'm hereby doing this, I'm directing the cabinet to do this, blah, 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 it's meaningless. I mean, that's why MP Garnet Genuis impersonated it, did a parody of it, where he's signing a document that it has equal legal weight. It doesn't mean anything. So yes, Carney has the authority to do it. Yes, it will happen, but it doesn't happen by making an executive order. There's no such power in Canada. And another irony with this is that there was this false perception In my opinion, it was false, that because Poilievre was conservative, he was just like Trump. Because Poilievre had big rallies, he was just like Trump. It's Carney that's imitating Trump's style and writing these executive orders and taking the PR page right out of the Oval Office. So if liberals impersonate Americans, I guess it gets a pass, but it's a double standard.
So that's very interesting. So Lee, it seems like you're underlying the point that our Canadian parliamentary tradition is not just signing, quote, executive orders. That's really the American tradition, ironically.
Yes, and Marco's got a great column coming out about this, which we'll see in future days. So I'm the beneficiary of his perspective on this. But yes, our parliamentary traditions are very different, and maybe Marco would like to speak to that.
No, I think you've pretty much nailed the point that I make in the column. The only thing that perhaps I would add is that all this is being done while we claim to have our elbows up in the protection of Canadian sovereignty and Canadian identity, when in fact this is very much against the core spirit of what it means to be a sovereign state in a sovereign country, and what it means to be Canadian. If the institution of Parliament is one of the key features that separate us in our identity from the American Republic.
Well said. So, Cory, as you look at this, does this mean that our institutions are, well, being put aside, that we're not really taking seriously the integrity of those institutions and those traditions in the spirit of the way our federation was founded in 1867? I mean, this is why we came together as colonies to form the British North America Act and this incredible country because of these traditions, wasn't it, Cory?
Well, yeah, and accountability. I mean, as per the name of the House of Commons, it was the place where the commoners could find out what's going on and perhaps at least have a little bit of impact upon it. But we've had a very odd and terrible year in a lot of ways. I mean, the Liberals have been terribly unaccountable since last fall when Parliament, even when it was sitting, was at a standstill because they refused to abide by parliamentary orders. So we were stuck in a filibuster until the election came. We've had no government going on. And what happened? They got rewarded with more seats. They're realizing that smoke and mirrors pays off more than performance. The bringing King Charles in to open the Parliament as actually a politically very bright move. It was a good way to symbolize that, hey, we are an independent nation and play into their campaign, but it doesn't do a darn thing to help us with our budget or accountability or seeing a functional government in front of us. But the distraction serves them very well. Everybody's going to be looking. It's very rare when a sitting monarch ever comes out to the Parliament, and people will be watching that, and unfortunately the average person in the public's not going to be realizing, hey, we didn't get a budget. They're not talking about what they're doing with their money.
Okay, so there's a lot of themes here coming together, and I'm speaking with a dynamic panel of Cory Morgan from the Western Standard, Lee Harding, investigative journalist and analyst with the Frontier Center, as well as Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie. So we appreciate your comments. We have a lot of them, including it's fascinating here. Comments such as, gosh, there's so many of them here. Canadians are more worried about the Stanley Cup over the cost of living. Well, what do you think about that? It's an interesting question. Those are certainly great diversions. I certainly enjoy hockey. Too bad about the Edmonton Oilers last night, but notwithstanding, I think the cost of living is very much on people's minds. And so one of the things that has really come up on people's minds has been our relationship between Canada and the United States and our need to manage that relationship well. It was a very prominent issue in the federal election, and some would say it was a deciding factor, the psychology or fear that the United States was going to take over Canada. So here I want to share a clip talking about Canada, I want to talk about Donald Trump, talking about a very important defense initiative. And I think we'll get to this in a moment as he talks about the so-called Golden Defense Dome.
I am pleased to announce that we have officially selected an architecture for this state-of-the-art system that will deploy next-generation technologies across the land, sea, and space, including space-based sensors and interceptors. And Canada has called us and they want to be a part of it. So we'll be talking to them. They want to have protection also. So as usual, we help Canada do the best we can.
So there you have it. The president in the Oval Office announcing this ambitious initiative. I believe it will be $200 billion in change over a period of 3 years. There you have the Golden Dome for America. It's kind of funny in a way because we know that the Iron Dome, the similar defense system that is over Israel, has proven to be quite effective. I believe that's accurate. And I guess this is something similar. It's almost like a part two, if you remember years ago in the 80s when the then President Ronald Reagan initiated a kind of a Star Wars initiative. And the point is that apparently Canada has reached out to the United States saying, us too, we want to be under the dome. So this is one of those moments where the Prime Minister has referred to, of course, the accusation by the United States that we've been a defense freeloader, but we definitely want to be under the dome in this case. So it's all one of these big variables in terms of kind of setting the relationship straight. So is this an opportunity for Canada to address defense issues when we look at this issue? Marco?
Well, yes, of course. Yes, I automatically thought of Star Wars and Ronald Reagan when I first saw the clip. There is two realities here. One is the sort of portrayal of the United States as this rogue enemy during the campaign. I want to remind people that the Prime Minister said during the French debate that he was going to deal with the Trump administration with crushing force. He said, "I don't see any crushing force. I don't think we could crush an orange with the state of affairs in the country." But the point is this: the Prime Minister sees two things. Canada could not be left out of such protection, considering that this is territorial North America, and should there be rocket attacks of any kind, Canada would need to be protected, because you can't just close the space and the dome, right up from the 54th parallel. That's one. But the second one is that the Prime Minister must be seeing all kinds of dollars and cents with the advent of this project, because it would be billions and billions of dollars in research and implementation, and the working with the Americans in order to put it together, et cetera, et cetera. So it represents an enormous windfall for scientific research and military applicable research for Canada as well.
No, it's a very good point. So is there an irony that that we're prepared to be under the dome, but during the election, as Marco was alluding to, it seemed like the relationship was over. Or is that just rhetoric, Cory?
Oh, it was definitely rhetoric. I mean, it would be completely, and it was irresponsible campaigning when you have as prickly a president as you do, as President Trump south of us. But the reality is, and Carney knows it, we are very tightly intertwined economies, very friendly nations with each other, even though we're having, something of some bumpy road right now. I mean, it's one of the longest standing peaceful partnerships and productive ones in the entire world. And for him to come out and say it's over was ridiculous. I think, though, that perhaps it kind of paid off in a sense that if there's any bombastic type of politician who likes to overstate things, it is Trump, so he could respect the political sense of the rhetoric rather than taking it personally. The relationship was never over, and it's never going to be. It just geographically and the similarity in culture that we have, that we're always going to be a very closely related countries.
Indeed, we're very integrated. I mean, and Lee, it's interesting. Your earlier comments about the budget, I think, were very insightful. That there's more to it in the sense that probably the deficit will be much higher than people will admit to, and we haven't figured everything out. So one of which is we haven't figured out truly how we're going to answer the Americans' concerns that we're defense laggards. So does that fit in your mind? Is it's hard to do the math here for a budget so quickly when we've got a lot of issues to address that are unknowns? We don't have a tariff agreement reset with the United States. We don't have a defense reset that I'm aware of. So, do you think that that's one of the reasons why we're just not having a budget right now?
Well, you could hang a lot. There's a hook where you could hang a lot of excuses on for various factors, but I've seen a lot of budgets, both provincial and federal, and there's contingency plans. I mean, they do growth expectations into the future, scenario 1, 2,
Yeah.
3. One's a medium, another one is very optimistic, another one's very pessimistic. I would hate to think that our federal government has not given any thought or estimate or calculation or best guess as to what the effects of lasting tariffs would be. That analysis needs to be done. And this started in January, this whole tariff fight, and there was plenty of time to do that kind of analysis or consideration. I recognize that Trump pulls the rug out from under you and then maybe puts it back and takes it out, but we're still basically talking about the same things. The percentages that we were talking about months ago have not changed. So I think this absolutely could be done. But you were right. I mean, there is going to be a cost to participating in this dome. And I mean, we've done this before. We've had a DEW line in our north where we participated with the Americans. So, but I'm sure that Trump is going to want us to kick in something. And even if we did, it wouldn't bring us up to our 2% NATO of GDP military spending targets that we have under NATO. And again, I mean, we heard Carney say, well, there's going to be different things that are going to come out of this NATO meeting that's coming. I mean, come on. The target has been sitting there at 2% for a long time. And it was very funny when Trump started pressing our government, when Trudeau was still around, you need to put your 2% or I'm going to put up the tariffs. All of a sudden, Bill Blair is saying, oh, yeah, it's absolutely doable. Well, why wasn't it? Yes, it always has been. If you make the priority to do it, you will do it.
Yeah, no, I think well said. Yeah, in budgeting, we can offer high, low, medium kind of scenarios, and that makes a lot of sense, Lee, your comments. I do want to remind people that there is a chat, and we really appreciate all your comments and questions. And it's interesting how our Walton says Canada is broken. Look at Western separation. So that's part of the background. Just a reminder that on June the 2nd, I believe there's going to be the Prime Minister's holding a conference with the premiers in Saskatoon. So that will be a very important meeting. The other thing I wanted to share with you is an interesting clip then by the Prime Minister responding to, well, a fascinating question about elbows up or elbows down, however you want to see it here.
During the election, you were Republicans saying that the old relationship that Canada has with the U.S. is over. You said that Donald Trump is trying to break us so he can own us. But now, just a couple weeks after the election, there's conversations, at least, about further integrating the Canadian military with the U.S. about the Golden Dome. What do you say to Canadians who voted for you based on your elbows up mentality with the Americans?
The process of deepening integration is over. We are in a position now where we cooperate when necessary, but not necessarily cooperate. So we have other options for that cooperation. We are pursuing those other options. You will see a very different set of partnerships, security and economic, going forward. But to be absolutely clear, when it is in Canada's interest, first best interest, to cooperate with the Americans, to strike deals with the Americans, relationships, and particularly in examples like ballistic missile defense, that may be the best option, and if so, we will pursue that.
So there you have it. The Prime Minister's kind of threading the needle, so to speak, in terms of, I think, rationalizing where the relationship is at, in the sense that, no, it's not over, but what's over is the deepening integration. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it remains to be seen. So what's your take on that, Marco? How do you interpret that kind of commentary by the Prime Minister in terms of policy?
Well, it's kind of an extension of what he is trying to do. I am reminded of something that Lee wrote not very long ago in relation to a statement done by now the Minister of Transport, Chrystia Freeland, who sort of hinted, in fact, she more than hinted, she expressed the idea that Canada didn't need the United States to defend itself. That we were going to rely on the Europeans, that we should strengthen relationship with the Europeans. And she went as far as essentially saying that Britain and France specifically were going to come to our aid. And Lee very aptly debunked the idea for a couple of reasons. One is, of course, that neither Britain or France have the depth of forces to be able to defend Europe, let alone defend us here all the way across to the other side of the Atlantic. So it's kind of a fantasy. The reality is he wants to say that we'll ally with the Americans if necessary, but not necessarily allied with the Americans. It's kind of a nonsense rhetoric. Canada very much depends on the United States, not just economically, but militarily and for defense purposes.
Okay. So well said. So, Cory, is that your take on it as well? This is more rhetorical rather than real policy?
Absolutely. I mean, some of it just comes to straight physical logistics, as was pointed out. We need to have a close relationship with the United States. There's there's been a lot of things out of President Trump, for example, that, the $200 billion trade deficit, calling it a subsidy was baloney, things like that. But he had a very valid point, and he twists that knife over and over again, that we aren't pulling our weight with defense. And it would be a very easy one for us to fill. The opportunity's been granted now. And I think perhaps Carney's considering it. Maybe that's what he's talking about with what might come up with NATO. Because as you said, I mean, England, France, fantastic to have them as partners. But they are on the other side of the ocean. It's our neighbor right next to us that we have to work with. And I believe Carney's smart enough to realize that.
Yeah, of course. So I did want to reference a very interesting clip that just came up, I believe it was yesterday, a statement by the FBI director and his deputy about the whole issue of fentanyl production. And it was, I thought, probably one of the most straight up comments about this issue related to Canada. And again, that concern about security. And I thought I'd share this with us as well.
So where's all the fentanyl coming from still? Where's the trafficking coming from still? Where are all the narco traffickers going to keep bringing this stuff into the country? The northern border. Our adversaries have partnered up with the CCP and others, Russia, Iran, on a variety of different criminal enterprises, and they're going and they're sailing around to Vancouver and coming in by air. And the sheer tyranny of distance of the northern border and the lack of cooperation from federal authorities in prior administrations to actually firm up that northern border is what's causing a continuation of violent crime. Now, we're focused on it.
So I thought that was really interesting that there was that kind of frank discussion. Did that surprise you, Lee, to hear that kind of frank talk from the FBI director?
I was more surprised to hear both of them insist that Jeffrey Epstein did not kill him or did kill himself.
Interesting.
I mean, he is referring to the Trudeau regime. He talks about past regimes, and he's clearly talking about Justin Trudeau. It is a little surprising. I think it's always politically convenient to say that some other jurisdiction and some other government is the reason for the problem that you have at home. So I could well believe it that we're not doing enough. And again, at Trump's prompting, Trudeau started to bring in some initiatives that we should have had all along. And so, yes, I'm sure that there is a problem. We had a super lab that was busted in BC. And this was actually, to our government's credit, our law enforcement's credit, before Trump started really pushing us on this in the context of a tariff. So yes, this is not an imaginary thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it certainly begs the question, are we doing our part to deal with these issues? I mean, obviously, we're not on the same scale as perhaps other countries like Mexico, but it's still an issue in terms of the scale of money laundering. I noticed that I believe it was TD Bank that has just announced layoffs of 2% of their workforce, because in part they're paying a massive multi-billion-dollar fine, I think, for money laundering, if that's a fair comment around these kinds of related issues. So this is very much on their horizon, on their radar, so to speak, and it looks like we've got a lot of issues. So speaking of issues, we have on June 2nd a premier's meeting. A lot has happened the last 3 weeks alone. But the point is that we have a lot of conditions that have been announced by the premier of Alberta and the premier of Saskatchewan regarding the need to make the federal-provincial relationships work better. And so I'm trying to get at, well, a whole bunch of issues here. But Cory, can you help us understand, where do you think we're at when it comes to the federal government hearing these concerns, like the need to get guaranteed energy corridors and port access for east-west energy, to addressing equalization payments? I mean, there's a whole list of them. Repealing Bill C-69, the so-called Never Pipeline bill. I mean, there's a long list here. Are you seeing communication happening here? Are you hoping that there will be a new formed relationship that allows our federation to keep together in unity? Any hope there, Cory?
Not really. Danielle Smith has put out a list of, it's no longer talking about negotiation. She's put out a list of demands. And reasonable people would see that those are reasonable demands, actually. I mean, we've discussed this. Canada's become vulnerable because we haven't built our infrastructure to get energy products to Tidewater, and it's harming the whole country. This case should be easily made to the whole country as to why we need to do this. But Prime Minister Carney is ideologically driven. He's written that in his books. He's hung up on the net zero just as much as Justin Trudeau is. He won't commit to some of the simple things to show that he means it when he says he would facilitate these. Get rid of C-69. Come on, the bill is trash. You can come up with a new regulatory scheme. Lay down the law and say a line is going to go through Quebec. If he's going to keep saying a province has a veto, that's another way of saying it's not going to get done. And when these things get done, part of what Danielle Smith is setting up, though, is those blocks. And every time one of them get blocked, yet again, it's showing now it's down to the demand part, not negotiating. The independence movement is only going to flare up even further because they're saying, well, we're trying everything else, and this government is stonewalling us. So we're getting into some tenuous waters with this right now.
All right. So there you have it, the statement that it seems like the federal government's going to stonewall on these demands. What do you think, Marco?
Well, there are, as there normally tend to be in Canadian discourse, central Canadian politicians have two, if not three, different discourses for depending on what part of the country they happen to be standing at. And I am reminded, listening to Cory, and of course I agree, that there is this desire to essentially trap Alberta oil in Alberta, keep it on the ground. All this nonsense that we heard in the years of the Trudeau regime, which essentially just simply continues. So this notion that the Alberta economy, as it relates to hydrocarbon energy, is going to be handicapped one way or another. We heard the recent minister, well, used to be called the Minister of Heritage, who is the former Minister of Climate Change and sundry nonsense, come out and say that the demand for oil is just simply going to evaporate within a couple of years from now. So there is no point in being worried about pipelines. He outright lied and said that the new pipeline was only running at 40%, and on and on. So there is that discourse there. At the same time, he wants to make the country an energy superpower. He doesn't really mean super hydrocarbons when he talks about superpower, energy superpower. But ultimately, one of the things that he originally caught my attention quite early in the campaign was when he said that we would have essentially a complete removal of all interprovincial trade barriers by the 1st of July.
Indeed, yes.
Barely a month away. Now, let's think about that. We've been talking about rhetoric quite a bit. this is something that hasn't happened in over 150, nearly 160 years soon. And all of a sudden, he promises that he's going to get rid of all these hurdles inside of less than 90 days. Now, the clock is ticking. We're 30 some days away from that. That's not going to happen. And at the same time, he continues his discourse that anybody who doesn't want pipelines or corridors or what have you will have his say, and then it will not be done. So that is essentially a signal that all sorts of groups, environmental Greens, and all sorts of different people, including, of course, the government of Quebec, will have a kind of veto over the removal of these barriers, one of which is, of course, for pipelines. And so one discourse on the one hand, another discourse on the other, that tells me that it isn't going to happen, first of all. And second, that whatever happens is going to happen only if the electoral fortunes of whatever decision they seek to make seem brighter in central Canada or not.
Okay, so I'm sensing, Marco, from you that you're not particularly optimistic, and I'm not trying to put words into your mouth here, but are you saying that the Prime Minister is almost kind of carefully revealing his set of policies? He's giving smaller signals to the groups that kind of brought him to electoral success as a minority Liberal government, and those groups are not going to change the course of policy that we've seen the last 10 years on energy. So we've got to be realistic about that. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, and Cory pointed out, and you said earlier, he outright came out and said that he has no intention, for example, of removing the legislation that prevents further construction of infrastructure like pipelines and so forth. So he is, in fact, holding two directly opposite types of discourse. And the only reason why one would do that, of course, is to try to gain favor with one group and the other at the same time. He's trying to have his cake and eat it. The bottom line, though, is because those two positions are diametrically opposed, that one of them is going to be on the losing end of it. And the one that we know is going to be on the losing end of it is going to be the one that is not favored by a larger number of voters, namely the voters in central Canada.
Okay. Lee, is that your take on this quandary that we're in right now as well?
My take parallels that. Carney has to look like he's doing something, and so there will be some movement on that just because there has been so many complaints from Alberta and Saskatchewan on this issue, and justifiable ones. So he'll want to move. How much he wants to move is not really clear because, again, if you read his book Values, he would really like to see us get off of the fossil fuel economy and get to a net zero. So in the meantime, Brookfield is investing in all kinds of pipeline projects where they can't get them shut down, but where they can, they would probably rather have them shut down. Now he's got the consideration that he needs to be reelected or might have a unity crisis. So you got to kind of look like you're doing it, but you have to dog it enough that there may not be a whole lot happening. Early in the campaign, after he had talked with Danielle Smith, she had made her demands, and he said, yes, we will see pipelines. And then later on in the campaign, he said, well, we will see infrastructure projects that may or may not include pipelines. Really, we don't know what we're going to get. I guess you could say Mark Carney's like a box of chocolates, to use Forrest Gump's words.
Okay. All right. So, Lee, you're based in Regina. So what is your take on the willingness of people to look at sovereignty outside of Canada? Is it hard to read that, or what's your sense of that?
I don't know this a whole lot through personal conversations, but through looking at polls and seeing some posts on social media and thinking about it, what we've seen in the past is that when the way that Alberta sees Confederation, sees energy issues, sees politics vis-a-vis Ottawa, Saskatchewan is right on board with that, just a little bit more moderate. So if there was a 70% opinion in Alberta, it might be 65%. Now, one of the polls that came out during the campaign was that actually it was a percentage or two higher, if Mark Carney won, that they would want to separate. So Saskatchewan was actually leading that one. I'm not sure that provincially there is as strong of a movement. The Wexit parties that rebranded themselves in Alberta and Saskatchewan, it seems like the Alberta ones are getting more media and more traction than the Buffalo Party is in Saskatchewan. But I think as far as the way that the provincial government is treating it, I think it's very similar. And Moe's also made 10 demands, Premier Moe in Saskatchewan. So
Yes.
It's very parallel. I would say that.
Okay, so that's an interesting comment because when I look, by the way, thanks again to the audience for your myriad of comments that are coming in here. It's just fascinating to see people's comments and questions, things like, well, thank you, Jimmy, for your comment. And of course, Canada is not for sale. I think I saw that before. Margaret says, I'm getting the point that separated Alberta will provide better for FN, land, water, roads, healthcare, jobs, and education. So, I think this is a very emotional time for many Canadians as they struggle with what is unfolding with the new government, but also what is the opportunity to build a stronger country. I know a lot of people are concerned about our economy. That's certainly one of the top issues when it comes to Canadians. And I guess my question is there a practical reality where the new government is faced with record-sized deficits and concerns about debt? And I've always said that in an election, it's not just the voters that get to vote, it's the bondholders, the people who buy the debt and have to get on board with the notion of credibility. And I know there's been an initial bit of a downgrade on our credit rating, I think by Finch and company. I think anyone looking at this says our economy, we really need to get rolling after 10 years of almost no growth. So I look at this, Cory, and I look at this and I think, is this going to just frankly hit the fan, so to speak? Yeah, here's this graph from the International Monetary Fund that shows that we are a growth laggard, and there's no mystery as to why. We are not seen as a friendly place to do business. We got high taxes, high regulation. I mean, the list goes on. So I look at that and I say, why would you knock out your top industry in this country, namely Canadian oil and gas, and not be all over that? Why would you not call Parliament back, get them to work, get things passed so that we can get this economy moving again? So won't that reality overshadow everything, Cory? Are you optimistic about that?
If we weren't governed by ideologues, yeah, I think that economic reality would strike home. They want to turn the economy around. One of the most ready and in-demand resources we have as a nation are our oil and gas products. Anybody rational would say, let's get that out to those markets as quickly as we can and exploit these resources and pay our bills and do well. But as Lee pointed out, or others, Mark Carney wants to keep it in the ground. He does not want this to be developed. But Albertans see this. We see those numbers. We see this growth lagging. Everybody sees it. And when we look at when our economy is now comparable to Mississippi, but our house prices are comparable to Los Angeles or New York City, we're really having a hard time. We got the low income and the high cost of living. Something's got to give. And when people pointing out the independence option say, well, we might not be able to save Canada, but we could save part of it. It's holding more and more appeal to people when they're starting to worry about their long-term future and the younger generation. It's different this time.
Okay, but you make a powerful point. You've got increased costs, including housing. And by the way, Frontier just released this week its marquee report with Demographia Center on, housing affordability is a train wreck in many of our major markets in this country. It's disgusting. And then you have high costs, and then you have a stagnant economy. Your wages are pretty flatlined. You've got kind of a train wreck. So in that context, is that what's really driving a lot of the independent movements or the separation movement, the sovereignty outside of Canada movement, Cory, from your perspective?
Most definitely. I mean, the difference between the Alberta movement, the Saskatchewan movement, and the Quebec is it tends to come down more to economics than culture. And culture is a stronger driver, I think, for independence movements than economic typically. But when you're starting to hit the wall, when you really are wondering how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to have a household, whether your kids are going to have a future, the cultural aspect, the economic impact comes first. If you can't pay the mortgage, nothing else matters anymore.
Right on. So Marco, where is the opportunity to bring this country together? Is there a needle to be thread here where we could kind of, well, find hope? Like a lot of our conversation is trying to recognize the reality, both the political reality, but it's the policies that are not at play or not at play that are enabling our country to come together, or conversely separate. Do you see a pathway to bring this country together at this point, or we'll just have to wait and see?
Cory, I think almost everyone in this conversation today, but Cory just a minute ago spoke about ideology. The principal framework here is that there is a clash of visions in the country from different perspectives. It's not entirely regional, but there is a view, and it's quite a zealot view, that unless we stop living the way we live, which is not a very bad way to live with all the problems that we have, needs to stop lest we trigger some kind of climate holocaust that is going to kill us all. And there is a significant number of people in this country, the vast majority of whom seem to be located in the Laurentian part of the country, that hold to that view. And then there is the rest of us, especially those who live in sort of more resource-prone areas, in agricultural areas and what have you, who have a more commonsensical view of the world. And those two are not easily reconcilable. And so from the point of view of a sort of a centralist, or somebody who wants to strengthen the federation, they would look at Quebec and say, yeah, Quebec has legitimate reasons for cultural reasons. They want to maintain their language, and they want to maintain their institutions and civil law and all that stuff. But when they look and they understand that one of the strengths of the federation is that it allows for that kind of variety and different ways of being.
Indeed.
But when they look west, they are completely engulfed in this sort of gloom and doom view of the world, and they do not and cannot, as far as I can tell, put themselves in the shoes of an Albertan or a farmer in Saskatchewan or what have you, who just wants to live and let be. And so, but they're being told that they cannot exercise their right, for example, to a certain kind of an economy or a certain kind of economic activity because it's contributing to the future coming of the end of the world. That is not going to change. And so what we have, and you see it, I mean, there are a lot of smart people. They're not dumb, and I don't mean to suggest that they are dumb, who claim that Alberta must be put down because it is going to break up the country. They are unable to see that a people, a region, a family who is suddenly shackled and prevented from earning a living and getting on with their lives isn't just going to say, "Oh, okay, I'm just going to lie down here and take it." So that's, I think, the message that the rest of the country outside of sort of the Prairie West needs to understand, that people are kind of fed up that this has happened before, and that they are not willing to let others ruin their lives.
Okay, so these are very important policy issues that impact people's lives. And I guess one of the things that strikes me about this is I was reading the Globe and Mail, of all things, last week, and I was struck by its analysis. I mean, it's one of many analyses, so I want to be fair to them. that kind of reflected on the whole notion that the sovereignty movement in Western Canada was really a fringe movement in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And this is where I'm not so sure if those types of media outlets, the legacy media, if you will, are really hearing the edge, if I can call it the edge. And I was talking, we just released, I believe it was yesterday, an episode with leaders, an interview with Dr. Dennis Modry and Jeff Rath, who is, of course, the general counsel for the Alberta Prosperity Project. In many ways, they're at the center of a very powerful organization advocating for sovereignty outside of Canada. And what struck me about that conversation, I encourage people to look at it, is that powerful articulation of how passionate they are about their right to pursue their lives and prosperity and not be, as you said, Marco, held down by a kind of a central government that is really impinging on provincial sovereignty. So this, really relates in many ways to they see this as people's lives at stake. And I guess my concern at this point is that if we have a federal government that can't really enable provincial rights and freedoms to be able to pursue prosperity, that the sovereignty movement will go from a so-called fringe movement of, 35% to more like 50%. So do you think that's a very real risk, Lee, as we approach this, is that if we don't hear each other, this could frankly turn on like a prairie brush fire, to use that analogy?
Well, I'll start out by saying that this is not a fringe movement. When you have 1/3 of people say they would support independence, now I acknowledge that you're not necessarily going to have 1/3 of people follow through, even the people that do tell you that. I mean, we've seen this before. 2019, there's no hardly anyone voting Liberal in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Oh, we're going to leave. Then I was reading in 2025, people still say, well, unless it turns around, well, now I'm going. I mean, come on. If you just talk like that forever, you're just talking. That's all. Admit it to your own self. But it's not to say that the sentiment is a fringe movement. When you're talking 32% of people, that is a lot. That's are you going to start calling the Green and NDP supporters fringe movements? That is very substantial. In fact, we've had the final two minority governments under Trudeau, that was about the level of support they got. So, I mean, what the people voting for the party that wins, are they a fringe movement too? So I'm not sure they really know what they're talking about. But this is old. I mean, when Premier Lougheed was running Alberta, he was talking to a Globe and Mail reporter who was named Pamela Wallen, and he said, well, what would you know about Alberta? And she says, well, I'm from Wadena, Saskatchewan, sir. I bet you don't even know where that is. And he sat down with her and gave her a long interview because he thought, here's someone who has a shot. So I think that there was that book a long time ago, The Two Solitudes, talking about how French and English Canada are completely different. But there's another rift between Eastern Canada and Western Canada. And I don't think they really appreciate what it means to live here. The solution is very simple. The things that Danielle Smith asked for are reasonable. They're good policy. There is nothing Alberta specific about it, unless you want to take the equalization point to say that Albertans do not want to keep propping up provinces that don't need the help. And equalization has become a corrosive force because it is too generous. And so if there is a case for it, it would be a lot more limited than what we're doing, and that can change. And we haven't even talked about the Senate. I mean, when you've got 6 seats for each of our Western provinces and you've got, 10 in New Brunswick or something, it's ridiculous. And, all these people that are saying that Alberta shouldn't want to leave, well, what would you be willing to give up to keep them? Would you be willing to lower your Senate seats to 4 in proportion to population so that a Canadian living in Alberta has as many senators per capita as where you live in the Maritimes? So if it actually came down to any practical consideration, that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think that's why we saw a lot of young people, especially the males who were voting Conservative this time, is because they're seeing what their prospects are, and they're not very good. If you're in the East and things seem to be going fine because you're in that sector, you're in that urban or public sector part of the economy, well, things are good. You have no idea what's going on with the people who are paying more and more taxes and getting kicked to the curb when their industries are the ones that are really fueling the real economy of this country.
Right on. So I think, Lee, you've made a very insightful point that the concerns from Western Canada for many isn't just simply dealing with the resource economy and other related issues, even culture, but as well as constitutional issues that have been a real concern for a long time, including, as you say, the Senate. So one of my questions to you all, as we've had this far-reaching conversation, is really about the opportunity for Saskatchewan and Alberta in this case to join hands with other provinces that have kind of similar concerns, not so much about separating per se, but about provincial rights. I mean, I think if we look at the last 10 years, we can look at it from an economic lens, but we also know that there's been a long pattern of the federal government putting its fingers into provincial matters. And I think this doesn't just drive Saskatchewan, Alberta bonkers, but it also has concerned other provinces. Do you see a link up with, well, Quebec in this case? I mean, Quebec has been a master at negotiating all kinds of privileges or opportunities. I mean, it's remarkable how they've worked within the Canadian system to enable them to get some, what is it, $14 billion a year from equalization alone. So, Cory, couldn't Alberta and Saskatchewan really link up with not just Quebec, but other provinces that get this, the need to stay in our constitutional lane?
Well, I think we can learn from Quebec. I mean, part of the reason Quebec is getting all the concessions they do is they brought themselves within 0.5% of a yes vote in an independence referendum. And the country's been bending over backwards ever since, begging them to stay and giving them anything and everything they ever demand. I guess it's unfortunate that you have to express a very strong provincial tantrum before you can start getting concessions from a federal government. But with the difference is, Quebec is standing up for itself. It's asserting itself, and good on them. That's the way it should be done. But they also do realize, and you see some of that caustic response from Blanchette, for example, to the independence movement in Alberta. They don't want the West starting to go independent because they do know where their bread's buttered. And they don't want more cooperation. They want to go their own way. And the Canada's system, I mean, theoretically, is very good. I mean, if the federal government just retracted to what it's supposed to be and let the provinces do what they will, we would be functioning very well from coast to coast, and every province should be able to agree on it. But unfortunately, it's now created this dependency from coast to coast, whether it's equalization and other things, that changing that status quo, when we've got people now dependent on government dental care and government, federal government child lunches and federal government housing programs, which never should have been in the provinces in the first place. And the will of these provinces now to extricate themselves from that central federal government, and, like a spider just spun a web over them. I don't see much hope in it. I mean, I understand that wanting to reach out to other provinces, but I just don't see it working, I'm afraid.
All right, so there you have it. Not a lot of optimism in terms of where we're going as a federation here. Marco, do you see, what are the next steps? What is your sense of how this is going to unfold? In the sense that we have this June 2nd meeting coming up. We've got NATO meetings. We've got trade talks with the United States. We've got all kinds of policy balls in the air here. And we have inevitably a budget that's coming up in the fall sometime. Where does this start to unfold, where the chips fall down and there's either going to be kind of reconciliation on these demands that have been made by Saskatchewan and Alberta or not? I mean, do you have a kind of a crystal ball that you could help us understand where do you think this will hit the fan, so to speak?
Yes, except that it's 40% devaluated in relation to the American.
That's right.
Look, none of this is brand new in a sense, right? Provincial rights has been sort of a staple discourse in the western part of this country, going back to the founding of Saskatchewan and Alberta, when Saskatchewan and Alberta did not or were not given rights to the natural resources. So this conversation has been going on for over 100 years, and so there is this other divide, in a sense, that that is not unbridgeable, by the way, but we need to be able to build arguments and get our cousins, if possible, in the Laurentian part of the country to begin to understand that these two visions basically boil down to this. One is this idea, and we've seen it surface more lately, that Canada can only be a strong country if Ottawa is strong and lords over its provinces, almost, in an authoritarian way. And the opposite view of the country is that the country can only be strong if its provinces are strong. And those two are not necessarily bridgeable, but they're not impossible to deal and to come together. In fact, the deal that brings the country together is exactly the compromise between those two views of the world, the sort of centralist, central Canadian view, and dealing with the provinces and the colonies were at the time in the Atlantic. And so unless this happens, unless we are able to bridge some and maybe if not all of the demands that Western Canadian provinces are now placing, namely Saskatchewan and Alberta, we're headed towards something that looks like the demise of the country as we know it. But otherwise, the country was built on compromise, and the doors should remain open. People should continue to talk about these things and provide the correct improvements for Alberta and Saskatchewan to continue. The question was asked, what is the rest of the country prepared to give up or to concede to keep Alberta and Saskatchewan in the fold? That is the remaining question.
Okay, so that's a well-placed question, Marco. I like your reference back to keeping perspective on shared power between the federal and provincial governments. I am just amazed by the comments coming in from our audience and so much appreciated them. I guess one of the things that strikes me in this conversation is one of them was posed by a number of audience members, and that is, what can citizens do in this situation? And I look at that and I think there needs to be a lot of conversation here. What can individuals do? And frankly, what should we invest in? That's from, I'm not quite sure if I can understand the name but that's a key question. So I want to turn to both of you as we wrap things up here. Lee, what's your advice there? What can citizens do in this kind of situation?
Before we address that, if we are wrapping up, I want to encourage everyone watching this to also subscribe to our Frontier Center for Public Policy channel, because we've got policy videos 5 minutes in length coming out almost daily. And we talk about, a lot of the ones lately have touched on many of the issues that we've talked about today. But what can an individual do? First of all, we're not going to give investment advice, because that's always the disclaimer of everyone who's not an investment broker. So we're not giving you any advice. And if you are a low-income person, as you represented yourself to be, you probably don't have a lot of money to invest. So what could one person do? Preston Manning had a book called Do Something, and it was 100 ways that any everyday citizen can participate in the political process. That might be a good place for you to start. But you're doing it. You're getting informed, and that is making you want to act. And then it's voting wisely, being activists in local causes, and being wise with your own money, because in the end, the government's probably not coming to save you. You've got to look out for yourself. And that's probably the policy that we need, is the best personal policy to live your best life that you can, making the wisest choices you can, to make the money you can, to save what you can, and give to those who need, and we can all help each other out.
Well said. Cory, any advice here?
Just similar to what Lee offered, we do have the mechanisms at our fingertips. Participatory democracy. Get yourself informed. If you choose to get involved, with lack of personal resources, investment wise or funding wise, it's all right. Every type of political action or movement thrives on volunteers and people participating as well. So if you want to seek out a group or a party, get out there and take hold of it. We can make the change, but it's one of the great things about the West. We don't wait for someone else to do it. Just get out there and get on it.
Right on. Marco?
I would echo that and say perhaps one more thing, is that the only possibility for people to begin to see the other way of thinking or the other person's way of thinking is to place themselves in their shoes. And we need to be able to open up our minds and open up spaces to have this conversation. I've heard people, for example, heap all kinds of insults against Albertans and what have you, and vice versa. We can also dish it out to our cousins in central Canada. That does not do much. Ultimately, politics runs on relationships and on friendships, as John von Hiking would say. And so it is absolutely necessary that these friendships continue and that we keep talking. Look, if it is the will of Albertans eventually that, they want to part ways, it is perfectly constitutional. The rules allow for that, as does for Quebec or for any other portion of the country. So we don't have to tear our hair out over having the conversation. Let's have the conversation, figure out what solutions there might be, and figure out what concessions we must make if we value the country and we want to keep it together.
Right on. So let's keep on talking. Let's keep in perspective our relationships. I think there's a lot that citizens can do, and encourage you to subscribe to Frontier, but also to share this program with people that you care about. This is an important issue, and it just strikes me that in this country, with the state of legacy media, we often don't hear each other and how significant these concerns and issues are. And it could mean whether we are a united Canada or not, but regardless, we have to live with each other. We all share the same continent. We all share the same place that we're privileged to call Canada or home right now. So let's work together. Let's raise our level of information and discourse. And that's why we are here today having these discussions. And we really appreciate everyone's comments. And I just encourage everyone. It's interesting how I always learn something new from our panelists. So I want to thank Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie from Frontier, as well as Lee Harding from Frontier, as well as Cory Morgan from the Western Standard for joining us today, and all the members of our audience. And be sure to join us next week, where our focus will be on issues of affordability, including the Frontier Housing Report, and are we becoming, frankly, a feudal society? So don't miss that one. And in the meantime, I hope everyone has a terrific week.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.